The sirens pierced through the afternoon air like knives, their wailing crescendo drowning out the last echoes of "Happy Birthday" that had been floating across the Martinez family's backyard just moments before. 8-year-old Diego Martinez lay gasping on the grass, his small chest heaving in desperate, irregular bursts, while his mother Maria knelt beside him, her hands shaking as she searched frantically through the scattered debris of what had been his birthday party. The bright yellow and red decorations hung torn from the fence, the carefully arranged tables overturned, and somewhere in the chaos, the one thing that could save her son's life had been thrown away like garbage. "Please," Maria whispered to the police officer standing over them, her voice breaking. "He needs his inhaler. He's having an asthma attack. Please." Officer Jenkins crossed his arms and shook his head. "Kid's faking it. We've seen this before. They put on a show to get sympathy." His partner, Officer Martinez, no relation to the family, nodded in agreement, their uniforms pristine and imposing against the backdrop of destroyed celebration. 3 hours earlier, the Martinez backyard had been a wonderland of childhood joy. Colorful streamers fluttered in the gentle breeze, and the scent of grilled hamburgers mingled with the sweet aroma of chocolate cake. Diego, small for his age, but with eyes that sparkled with pure happiness, had been unwrapping presents with the careful precision that only an 8-year-old could manage, savoring each moment as if he knew how precious it was. "Open mine next," shouted his cousin Sophia, bouncing on her toes as she pointed to a carefully wrapped box. Diego's face lit up as he tore away the paper to reveal a set of art supplies, complete with colored pencils, markers, and a sketchbook. "This is perfect," Diego said, holding up the set with reverence. "I'm going to draw everything. The whole party. All of you. Everything." His asthma had been acting up more frequently lately, keeping him indoors on many days. But today was different. Today was his day, and his parents had made sure everything was perfect. Maria watched from the kitchen window as she prepared the final touches for lunch, her heart full as she saw her son surrounded by family and friends. Her husband Carlos was manning the grill, flipping burgers with theatrical flair that made the kids giggle. Their older daughter Isabella was organizing a game of musical chairs, while the cousins and neighborhood kids ran around the yard in a joyful chaos that spoke of summer afternoons and childhood memories being made. The Martinez family had lived in this house for 6 years, ever since Diego was 2. They'd chosen this particular street in Riverside Heights specifically because it felt safe, welcoming, and perfect for raising children. Most of their neighbors were friendly, offering waves from their porches and helping with packages when deliveries came. But there was one house that cast a shadow over their otherwise peaceful existence. 2 doors down lived Catherine Whitmore, a 62-year-old retired bank manager who had appointed herself the unofficial keeper of neighborhood standards. She'd moved in 3 years ago after her divorce, bringing with her a bitterness that seemed to seep into everything she touched. Her perfectly manicured lawn stood in stark contrast to the lived-in yards around her, and her house was always silent, curtains drawn, like a fortress against the life happening around her. Catherine had made her feelings about the Martinez family clear from the beginning. There had been the complaint about their holiday decorations being excessive, the formal letter to the Homeowners Association about their vegetable garden being unsightly, the multiple calls to city code enforcement about their dog barking. Despite the fact that they didn't own a dog, each incident had been brushed off by the family as the eccentricity of an unhappy neighbor. But today would prove that Catherine's animosity ran much deeper than anyone had imagined. As the party reached its peak around 1 o'clock, with 12 children laughing and playing in the backyard, Catherine stood at her kitchen window, her thin lips pressed into a line of disapproval. The sound of children's laughter drifted across the yards, mixing with the upbeat music Carlos had playing from a small Bluetooth speaker. To most people, It would have been the sound of joy, of community, of life being celebrated. To Catherine, it was an affront to her carefully maintained world of silence and control. "This is absolutely unacceptable," she muttered to herself, watching as Diego opened another present and squealed with delight. The noise ordinance clearly states that excessive sound is prohibited on weekends before 3 p.m. This was, of course, completely false. But Catherine had a way of twisting facts to fit her worldview. She picked up her phone and dialed 911, her voice taking on the practiced tone of someone who had made such calls before. "Yes, I need to report a major disturbance at 1247 Maple Street. There's excessive noise, possible drug activity, and I'm concerned for public safety. There are children being exposed to dangerous conditions." The dispatcher, Angela Rodriguez, had been working the weekend shift for 3 years and had fielded her share of frivolous calls. But something in Catherine's voice, the way she emphasized dangerous conditions and children at risk, triggered the protocols that required immediate response. "Ma'am, can you describe the specific nature of the danger?" Angela asked, her fingers already typing up the incident report. "There are strange sounds. Shouting. What sounds like fighting? I can see people gathered in the backyard, and there are children who appear to be in distress. Someone needs to check on this immediately." Catherine's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being believed. Her years in banking having taught her exactly how to present information to get the response she wanted. Within 12 minutes, 2 patrol cars were racing down Maple Street, their sirens growing louder as they approached the Martinez house. Officers Jenkins and Martinez had been partners for 8 months, both relatively new to the Riverside Heights beat, both eager to prove themselves in a department that valued quick response and decisive action over nuanced community policing. The police cars pulled up to the curb with dramatic flourish, their lights flashing red and blue across the peaceful suburban street. The officers emerged with hands resting on their weapons, their training telling them to treat every call as potentially dangerous until proven otherwise. In the backyard, the sudden appearance of sirens caused the party to pause mid-laugh. Carlos looked up from the grill, his spatula suspended in mid-flip, while Maria emerged from the house carrying a tray of drinks, her face already creasing with concern. "Daddy, why are the police cars here?" Diego asked, his voice small and worried. His inhaler sat on the patio table next to his pile of birthday presents, the bright blue device that had become as much a part of his daily routine as brushing his teeth. "I'm sure it's nothing, mijo," Carlos said, but his voice carried an uncertainty that made Diego's anxiety spike. The boy's breathing had become slightly more labored, a common response to stress that his parents had learned to watch for carefully. Officers Jenkins and Martinez appeared at the backyard gate without knocking, their uniforms and badges giving them the authority to enter private property when responding to a disturbance call. The 12 children at the party, ranging in age from 5 to 10, fell silent as the officers surveyed the scene with suspicious eyes. "We received reports of a disturbance, possible endangerment of children," Officer Jenkins announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet yard. "We need everyone to remain calm while we assess the situation." Carlos stepped forward, his natural diplomacy kicking in. "Officers, there's no disturbance here. We're just having a birthday party for our son Diego. Everything's under control. Everyone's safe. Sir, we'll determine what's safe and what isn't." Officer Martinez replied curtly, "We need to see identification from all adults present and verify that all children are accounted for and unharmed." Maria felt her stomach drop. She'd heard stories from other Latino families about routine encounters with police that had escalated far beyond reason, but she'd always hoped that their middle-class suburban life would protect them from such experiences. Now, watching her son's birthday party transform into something that felt more like an interrogation. She realized how naive that hope had been. "Of course," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady for the sake of the children. "I'll get our IDs. Carlos, can you help gather the other parents?" But as the adults began to comply with the officer's requests, Diego's breathing became more labored. The stress of the situation, combined with the physical exertion of playing all afternoon, was triggering the asthma attack that his parents had been carefully managing all day. "Mom," he wheezed, his small hand reaching toward the patio table where his inhaler sat. "I need—" Officer Jenkins, misinterpreting the boy's movements as potential flight or resistance, stepped between Diego and the table. "Kid needs to stay put until we sort this out," he said firmly. "Please, he has asthma," Maria said urgently. "He needs his medication. It's right there on the table." Officer Martinez glanced at the blue device and shook his head. "Could be anything. Could be drugs. We can't let him access unknown substances until we've verified what they are." The irony was devastating and clear to everyone present except the officers. Diego's rescue inhaler, the thing designed to save his life in exactly this situation, was being treated as evidence of criminal activity. His breathing became more desperate. The familiar tightness in his chest that his parents knew meant they had minutes, not hours, to act. "That's an albuterol inhaler prescribed by Dr. Williams at Children's Hospital," Carlos said, his voice rising with desperation. "My son is having an asthma attack. He needs that medication now." But Officer Jenkins had already picked up the inhaler, turning it over in his hands as if examining evidence at a crime scene. "This could contain any number of substances. We'll need to have it tested before anyone uses it." The other children at the party began to cry as they watched Diego struggling to breathe, their young minds unable to understand why the adults who were supposed to protect everyone were making things worse. Isabella, Diego's older sister, tried to move toward her brother, but Officer Martinez held up a hand to stop her. "Everyone needs to stay exactly where they are until we complete our investigation," he commanded. From her window, Catherine Whitmore watched the scene unfold with satisfaction. This was exactly what she'd hoped would happen when she made the call. The Martinez family, with their loud parties, and their children who dared to exist joyfully in her neighborhood, were finally being put in their place. She didn't see a child struggling to breathe. She saw vindication of her complaints. What Catherine didn't know was that her neighbor across the street, Marcus Johnson, had been filming the entire encounter from his kitchen window. Marcus, a 28-year-old social worker who had grown up in communities where police interactions could turn deadly without warning, had instinctively reached for his phone the moment he saw the officers enter the backyard. His live stream, initially watched by only his girlfriend and a few friends, was about to become the digital evidence that would change everything. "This is unbelievable," Marcus whispered into his phone as he narrated the scene for his viewers. "Police are at a child's birthday party, and they're treating an asthma inhaler like it's contraband. The kid can barely breathe." By now, Diego's breathing had become so labored that even the officers should have recognized the medical emergency unfolding before them. His lips were beginning to take on a bluish tinge, his small chest working overtime to pull in enough oxygen. Maria had moved closer to her son, despite the officer's instructions to stay back, her maternal instincts overriding her fear of legal consequences. "Diego, baby, try to stay calm," she whispered, kneeling beside him. "Take slow breaths. In through your nose, out through your mouth." Officer Jenkins stepped toward them, his authority challenged by Maria's defiance. "Ma'am, I told you to stay back. If you can't follow simple instructions, we're going to have a problem." "My son is having a medical emergency," Maria shouted, her composure finally breaking. "Look at him. He can't breathe. He needs his inhaler." in a move that would be replayed millions of times across social media in the coming days. Officer Jenkins grabbed the inhaler from the patio table and threw it into the garbage can beside the grill. Problem solved. No more distractions. The collective gasp from the adults at the party was audible. Carlos lunged toward the garbage can, but Officer Martinez intercepted him, pushing him back with enough force to send him stumbling. "Sir, you need to control yourself, or you'll be placed under arrest," Officer Martinez warned. Meanwhile, Marcus's live stream was gaining viewers rapidly. His girlfriend had shared it on Facebook, where it was picked up by local community groups and shared again. Within minutes, hundreds of people were watching the scene unfold in real time, their comments flooding the feed with outrage and disbelief. "Someone needs to call an ambulance," one viewer commented. "That child is turning blue." "This is criminal," wrote another. "Those officers are going to kill that kid." Marcus, reading the comments as he filmed, began to realize that he was documenting something that went far beyond a routine police call. He was capturing evidence of what could become a tragedy, and his live stream might be the only thing standing between Diego Martinez and serious harm. "I'm calling 911 for medical assistance," Marcus announced to his viewers, putting the call on speaker while continuing to film. "This child needs immediate medical attention." Back in the Martinez yard, Diego's condition was rapidly deteriorating. His breathing had become so labored that he could no longer speak, his small hands clawing at his throat in the universal gesture of someone who couldn't get enough air. The other children were now openly sobbing, traumatized by watching their friends suffer, while the adults who were supposed to help stood by powerless. Isabella, despite being only 12 years old, demonstrated courage beyond her years. She slipped away from the group and retrieved her brother's backup inhaler from the kitchen, hidden in a drawer where her parents kept emergency medical supplies. As she returned to the backyard, Officer Jenkins spotted her. "What do you think you're doing?" he demanded, reaching for the inhaler in her hands. "Saving my brother's life," Isabella replied, her voice steady despite her tears. "This is his backup inhaler. He's going to die if he doesn't get it." The confrontation between a 12-year-old girl and a grown police officer, captured in stunning clarity by Marcus's phone camera, would become one of the most shared and discussed moments of the entire incident. Isabella's bravery, standing up to authority to protect her brother, represented everything that was right in a situation that had gone so terribly wrong. Officer Jenkins reached for the second inhaler, but Isabella was too quick. She dodged around him and managed to place the device in Diego's hands before being roughly pulled away. "You're interfering with a police investigation," Officer Martinez shouted, grabbing Isabella by the arm with enough force to leave bruises that would be photographed later as evidence. Diego, with the instinct of someone who had been managing his condition for most of his short life, immediately activated the inhaler and took 2 deep puffs. The medication began to work within seconds, but the damage to his respiratory system from the extended attack had already been done. As Diego's breathing began to stabilize slightly, Marcus's live stream reached a critical mass of viewers. Local news stations were now monitoring social media feeds as part of their breaking news coverage, and several reporters had begun tracking the incident in real time. The hashtag #JacquesDiegoMartinez began trending locally, then regionally, as the video was shared across multiple platforms. Dr. Sarah Chen, an emergency room pediatrician at Children's Hospital, was among the viewers of Marcus's stream. She immediately recognized the severity of Diego's condition and began typing comments, trying to provide medical guidance to anyone at the scene who might be able to help. "This child needs immediate medical attention," she wrote. "Status asthmaticus can be fatal. Someone please call 911 for medical emergency." But the person who should have been calling for medical backup, Officer Jenkins, remained convinced that Diego was faking it for attention. His training had apparently never covered the reality that an 8-year-old child couldn't fake the physiological signs of severe respiratory distress, and his ego prevented him from admitting that he might have misjudged the situation. The breakthrough moment came when Captain Williams of the Riverside Heights Police Department, alerted by concerned citizens who had seen the live stream, arrived at the scene. Captain Williams, a 20-year veteran with 3 children of his own, took one look at Diego and immediately called for an ambulance. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Why wasn't medical assistance called immediately?" Officer Jenkins began to explain about the disturbance call and the suspicious substances, but Captain Williams cut him off with a look of disgust. "That's an asthma inhaler, you idiot. And this is a child's birthday party. Have you completely lost your minds?" The ambulance arrived within minutes of Captain Williams's call, but the damage had already been done. Diego's prolonged asthma attack had stressed his cardiovascular system to dangerous levels, and the paramedics immediately recognized that he needed hospitalization. As the EMTs loaded Diego onto a stretcher, his small hand still clutching the inhaler that had likely saved his life, Maria climbed into the ambulance beside him. Her last view of the house where they'd planned to celebrate her son's 8th birthday was of overturned tables, scattered presents, and yellow police tape that seemed to mock the cheerful decorations still hanging from the fence. At Riverside General Hospital, Dr. Martinez again. No relation to the family admitted Diego to the pediatric intensive care unit for observation and treatment. His oxygen saturation levels were dangerously low, and there was concern about the long-term impact of the prolonged attack on his developing lungs. "Mrs. Martinez," Dr. Martinez said gently. "Diego is stable now, but this was a very serious episode. Without that second inhaler, we could have been looking at a very different outcome." Meanwhile, Marcus's live stream had exploded across social media. The video had been viewed over 50,000 times in the first hour, with major news networks picking up the story. The footage of Officers Jenkins and Martinez treating a child's medical emergency as a criminal matter, combined with the image of Diego struggling to breathe while his medication was thrown in the garbage, sparked immediate outrage. ESPN reporter Lisa Thompson, who happened to be scrolling through social media during her lunch break, saw the video and immediately recognized its significance. As someone who had covered numerous stories about police interactions with communities of color, she understood that this wasn't just a story about one family. It was a window into systemic problems that affected countless others. "I'm driving to Riverside Heights," she told her producer within an hour of seeing Marcus's video. "This story is going to be huge, and we need to be there when it breaks wide open." By evening, as Diego slept in his hospital bed surrounded by machines monitoring his vital signs, the story had reached national attention. Civil rights organizations were already preparing statements. Legal experts were discussing potential lawsuits on cable news, and politicians were being asked for their responses to the video that had shocked the conscience of anyone who watched it. But perhaps the most significant development was happening quietly in the background. As investigators began to dig into Catherine Whitmore's history of complaints and 911 calls, what they discovered would add another layer to an already complex story of bias, abuse of power, and the devastating consequences of unchecked prejudice. Detective Sarah Patterson, assigned to investigate the circumstances that led to Diego's hospitalization, found a pattern that stretched back 3 years. Catherine Whitmore had made 47 complaints to various city departments about the Martinez family specifically, ranging from noise violations that couldn't be substantiated to claims of property damage that never occurred. She had called 911 6 times in the past year, always reporting suspicious activity at houses owned by families of color, and never once had her complaints resulted in actual evidence of wrongdoing. We're looking at a classic case of harassment disguised as civic concern, Detective Patterson told her supervisor. This woman has been systematically targeting this family and others like them, using our department as her personal enforcement agency. The revelation that Catherine's call had been part of a long-term pattern of harassment, rather than a legitimate concern about children's safety, transformed the narrative from a story about police overreach to a more complex tale about how racial bias and personal prejudice could be weaponized through official channels. As the story continued to gain national attention, other neighbors began to come forward with their own experiences with Catherine Whitmore. The Johnsons, an African-American family 3 houses down from Catherine, described years of harassment that had escalated to the point where they were considering moving. The Patel family, who ran a small grocery store downtown, revealed that Catherine had tried to organize a boycott of their business, claiming it was changing the character of the neighborhood. Marcus's girlfriend, Jennifer Davis, a journalism student at the local university, began documenting these stories as part of what would become a comprehensive investigation into how one person's prejudice had infected an entire community's relationship with law enforcement. What we're seeing here, Jennifer wrote in her analysis, is how personal bias gets amplified through institutional power. Catherine Whitmore couldn't harm the Martinez family directly, so she found a way to use the police department as her weapon. 3 days after Diego's birthday party ended in hospitalization, the community response reached a crescendo. A candlelight vigil was organized in Riverside Heights Park, drawing more than 500 people from across the city. Parents brought their children, holding signs that read, "Healthcare is a human right," and "Children deserve protection, not persecution." Diego, still recovering but well enough to attend with his oxygen tank, became an unwilling symbol of resilience and courage. When he was invited to speak, his words were simple but profound. "I just wanted to have a birthday party with my friends," he said into the microphone, his young voice carrying across the silent crowd. "I don't understand why that was wrong." The legal consequences began to unfold rapidly. Catherine Whitmore was charged with filing false police reports and child endangerment, charges that carried potential jail time and significant fines. Her decades-long career in banking, built on an image of respectability and civic responsibility, crumbled as employers and colleagues learned about her pattern of harassment. Officers Jenkins and Martinez faced immediate suspension, pending investigation, and their body camera footage, which they had conspicuously failed to activate during the incident, became a key piece of evidence in both criminal and civil proceedings. The police department's initial defense of their actions evaporated as public pressure mounted, and the video evidence made their behavior indefensible. The civil lawsuit, filed by the Martinez family's attorney, Elena Rodriguez, sought not just financial compensation for Diego's medical expenses and trauma, but systemic changes in how the police department responded to calls involving children and medical emergencies. The lawsuit became a class action when other families came forward with similar experiences. This case represents everything wrong with policing in America today, Attorney Rodriguez announced at a press conference, when officers can't distinguish between a birthday party and a crime scene, when they treat a child's medical emergency as suspicious activity, when they literally throw life-saving medication in the garbage. We have a system that has failed at the most basic level. The financial impact on Catherine Whitmore was swift and devastating. Her homeowner's insurance refused to cover the liability claims, citing the intentional nature of her actions. The lawsuit seeking damages for Diego's medical expenses, pain and suffering, and the family's emotional trauma demanded compensation that exceeded her assets. Within months, she was facing foreclosure on the house she had been so determined to protect from the perceived threat of happy children playing nearby. But perhaps the most powerful consequence was the community response that extended far beyond legal proceedings. The Martinez family, initially isolated by Catherine's campaign of harassment, found themselves surrounded by support from neighbors they'd never met, organizations they'd never heard of, and complete strangers who had been moved by Diego's story. The birthday party, that had been interrupted by police sirens, was recreated 3 weeks later in Riverside Heights Park, this time with over 200 children in attendance. Local businesses donated food, decorations, and entertainment, while parents who had been strangers became friends, united by their determination to create the kind of community where every child could celebrate safely. Diego, his asthma now under better control with new medication and monitoring equipment provided by donations from across the country, found himself at the center of a celebration that far exceeded anything his parents could have imagined. But more importantly, he found himself part of a community that had proven its willingness to protect all of its children. "This is the best birthday party ever," he told his mother as he watched children of all ages, races, and backgrounds playing together on the equipment that had been installed in the park, using funds raised in his name. "Can we do this every year?" The policy changes that resulted from Diego's case extended far beyond Riverside Heights. Police departments across the state implemented new training requirements focused on de-escalation, medical emergency recognition, and cultural sensitivity. The Diego Protocol became shorthand for a comprehensive approach to community policing that prioritized protection over enforcement, particularly when children were involved. Officer Jenkins and Martinez were ultimately terminated and faced criminal charges for child endangerment and abuse of authority. Their police certifications were revoked, ensuring they could never again work in law enforcement. The department's settlement with the Martinez family included provisions for ongoing medical care for Diego and funding for asthma education programs in schools throughout the district. Catherine Whitmore's fate served as a cautionary tale about the real-world consequences of prejudice and false reporting. Convicted on multiple charges, she served 18 months in county jail and was required to perform 500 hours of community service, working with organizations that supported victims of hate crimes. Her house was sold to pay legal fees and damages, and she moved out of Riverside Heights in disgrace. But the story's most lasting impact wasn't in the legal consequences or policy changes, significant as they were. It was in the transformation of a community that had learned to see past differences and stand together when it mattered most. The Martinez family, once isolated by one person's hatred, became the center of a network of relationships that strengthened the entire neighborhood. A year later, as Diego prepared to celebrate his 9th birthday, he stood in the backyard that had once been the scene of trauma and looked around at the preparations being made by dozens of families who now considered themselves extended relatives. The decorations were brighter, the guest list was longer, and the atmosphere was filled with something that had been missing before: absolute confidence that this child and all children deserved to be celebrated, protected, and loved without reservation. "Mom," Diego said, holding up the artwork he'd been creating throughout his recovery, "I drew the whole story, from the scary part to the good part. Do you want to see?" Maria looked at her son's drawing, which showed the transformation from chaos to community, from fear to friendship, from isolation to inclusion. In a child's simple but profound artistic vision, she saw the real truth of what they'd all lived through together. "It's beautiful, mijo," she said, pulling him close. "And the best part is that it's not finished yet. We get to keep adding to it." As the sun set over Riverside Heights on the evening before Diego's 9th birthday, the community that had been fractured by hatred and healed by love prepared for a celebration that would honor not just one child's special day, but the enduring power of people who choose to stand together when it matters most. The sirens that had once brought fear now symbolized response and protection. The neighbors who had once been strangers had become family, and a little boy who had struggled to breathe had helped an entire community learn to breathe freely again. The Martinez family's ordeal had ended not just in justice, but in joy. Diego's birthday party, interrupted by prejudice and violence, had become the seed of something beautiful, a community united in its commitment to ensure that every child's laughter would be protected, every celebration would be safe, and every birthday would be a day of pure happiness. Exactly as it should be. In the end, Diego Martinez's 8th birthday became the day that changed everything, not just for one family, but for an entire community that learned the difference between the law and justice, between authority and protection, between the fear that divides and the love that heals. It was a reminder that sometimes the most important battles are fought not by armies or politicians, but by ordinary people who refuse to accept that cruelty is inevitable and who insist that every child deserves to celebrate their existence without fear. And every year since then, as Diego blows out his birthday candles, surrounded by friends who span every background and boundary that once seemed to matter, the wish he makes is always the same: that every child, everywhere, gets to feel as safe and loved and celebrated as he does in that moment. It's a wish that his community has made their mission to fulfill. One birthday party, one family, one act of love at a time,